So earlier today, we had an absolute massive bombshell that ended up dropping where one of the league's best corners in the NFL became available via trade. And I think for the Las Vegas Raiders, you have to realistically consider bringing in Jalen Ramsey, who I think is still a top 5 cornerback if you guys did not hear the report. Ian Rappaport put it out there that the Dolphins and 7-time Pro Bowl cornerback Jalen Ramsey are mutually set to explore trade options, and it wouldn't be a surprise if he played elsewhere in 2025, per me and Tom Pelissero. Now, Ian Rappaport is saying that it's most likely going to happen, but the general manager of the Miami Dolphins also confirmed today that they are going to split. Adam Schefter reported that the Miami general manager, Chris Greer, actually told reporters today this. He said, "We decided it was probably in the best interest for all parties to move forward," separately in parentheses as well. To me, this basically means that Jalen Ramsey and the Miami Dolphins are essentially going to split. And it's kind of interesting because Miami made that trade for Jalen Ramsey just a year and a half ago. This guy spent basically 2 seasons with the Dolphins. Do note that Vic Fangio was defensive coordinator in 2023 for the Dolphins, and he ended up leaving and joining the Eagles in 2024. He obviously felt like the talent for the Dolphins on the defensive side, although it was solid, it wasn't the type of defense that long-term was going to be able to have success, given you had a bunch of young guys that needed to get paid, offense, defense. You had guys like Tyree and Jalen Ramsey that were, some of the highest paid guys as well. And it's just one of those things where for the Dolphins, they're trying to reset. And, I talked about this yesterday as well. The Dolphins would be smart to draft a quarterback as well, which we'll talk a little bit about quarterbacks here in a second because we did get a pretty interesting update that did come out. But it does look like Jalen Ramsey and the Miami Dolphins will split. And again, I think for the Raiders, this could be a potential huge get, especially when you talk about the scheme that Pete Carroll is going to essentially implement with the Raiders. We already have seen the guys that we brought in, right? Isaiah Pola-Mao was the first guy that the Raiders basically extended. He's the type of safety. He's the type of, Swiss Army knife type of player on the defensive side. A guy that can line up at linebacker, at slot corner, on the line of scrimmage, in the A-gap, right? Isaiah Pola-Mao is the type of guy that Pete Carroll would have absolutely loved. In fact, Pete Carroll had Isaiah Pola-Mao. Right? He had Cam Chancellor for a number of years. And even more than that, they brought in Jamal Adams. That was another guy that Pete Carroll ended up paying. And the Raiders have been kind of making the shift away from Patrick Graham's scheme to the Pete Carroll scheme. And we see it with some of the guys that they've essentially signed, right? Isaiah Pola-Mao, first guy that they essentially extended. They went out and got Jeremy Chin, who's another guy that's similar to Isaiah Pola-Mao, similar to, Cam Chancellor. He's a guy that kind of plays all over the field. They went out and got a couple other players as well, right? Eric Stokes, 6'1", 6'2". He's long, he's lengthy, he's big. To me, Jalen Ramsey's a good scheme fit, right? Because we're clearly switching our scheme this season to what Pete Carroll essentially ran, right? We're going to get zone-based corners. We're going to get bigger. We're going to get larger. We'll get a little bit slower, right? We don't need the Jack Jones type of players, right? We don't need the guys with fluid hips as much. Jalen Ramsey could be a great fit for the Raiders. And if you're the Raiders, why not pursue one of the guys that I think is one of the best corners in the NFL? In fact, statistically, last year he gave up 70% of catches, only 546 yards. He gave up 2 touchdowns, had 2 interceptions, had 5 pass breakups. But we got to realize, the Rams went from 2 different defensive schemes in the 2 years Ramsey was there. So there was really no consistency for this guy, right? But now he'd essentially be coming over to the Raiders, where I think he's a guy that could fit really well with this scheme and system. He's 30 years old, so, he's not by any means, necessarily in his prime for that position, but he's still very solid. And I don't think this would cost a 1st, 2nd, or 3rd round pick. Like, at best, the Dolphins, I think, get, a 4th round pick. I think at best, that's what they'd end up getting. And if I'm the Raiders, send them a 4th round pick from next year's class. You might even be able to get him for less than that, right? There's a real chance because this guy's not in his prime anymore. Again, I think for the Raiders, this is the type of guy that can really benefit your team. From a contract perspective, it also makes a ton of sense. So Jalen Ramsey's contract right now, you're going to get a $16.6 million cap hit for 2025. That's basically what it's going to cost the Raiders to bring in Jalen Ramsey from this season. Now, he does have this amount in his contract as well, but we would opt out of this. And because we weren't the team that signed Jalen Ramsey, we lose nothing, right? So if the Dolphins release Jalen Ramsey after 2025, they would incur a $18.4 million dead cap hit. But the Raiders will not incur that, right? Because that's going to be be based off of what they did. That's their transaction. They're going to incur that cap hit for moving off of Jalen Ramsey. For the Raiders, it's basically just going to be a 1-year contract for $16.6 million. Now, one of the things the Raiders can do is they could say, hey, we'll give you another extension, right? You have the 2025, 16.6. We'll give you $25 million, right, to basically extend for another season, right? So 2 seasons for Jalen Ramsey. The Raiders just have to pay an additional $25 million. We'd have to give him the 16.6 as well, but that basically puts you at about 20 to 21 million per year for 2 years of Jalen Ramsey. And I think for the Raiders, that's a very, very solid contract. It's a very solid offer. And again, not as fluid as he once was, but he's still a guy that can be a very, very solid player. Asante Samuel is one of the greatest cornerbacks in NFL history. And he said something that I think could make a lot of sense for the Raiders. He said that Jalen Ramsey may not agree with me, but I bet he would be more productive at safety at this point in his career. His numbers will be crazy. Thank me later. I could see Jalen Ramsey being an incredible safety at this point in his career. Remember, we saw Charles Woodson kind of make that same switch as he got a little bit older in his career. And Woodson, even in his final, couple of years in the NFL, was having, 4, 5, 6 interceptions a season. I think Jalen Ramsey has that type of upside, right? Because he's very smart. He processes well. He's the type of guy that can bait quarterbacks into bad passes. And I think for the Raiders, the one thing right now is, we do need a true post safety. And I think Jalen Ramsey can still fit that. Again, I know he's not in his prime, and he may not be the most fluid, but I still think he would be able to play post safety. Again, I think he can play corner as well, right? He'd be a boundary corner in a zone scheme. I think this would be a really, really, really solid potential pickup for the Raiders. But again, we'll see if the Raiders have the cap dollars and if they have the actual cash available to potentially bring him in. And if the Dolphins are willing to let him go for a 4th or 5th round pick. Jalen Ramsey in the past has, essentially wanted to be with the Raiders after he signed his initial, he was initially with the Jacksonville Jaguars, and he had a contract offer from the Raiders. The Raiders wanted to bring this guy in after his rookie contract expired, and obviously he ended up going elsewhere. But the Raiders were a team that this guy wanted to potentially go to.
I was like, please get me here. Please get me here was, at the time, the Oakland Raiders, that now are Las Vegas Raiders. I dang near begged to go to the Raiders. I begged to go to the Raiders. And they sent in an offer. And
we'll see what ends up happening, man. I think John Spytek and Pete Carroll will do the right thing. They've been fairly conservative up to this point. And this is kind of why you want to be conservative. You go all in during free agency. You have no money left for these type of players. And Jalen Ramsey won't be the last player at this point, right? We'll get other superstar caliber players that hit the trade block, right? Devontae Adams was a guy a couple years ago that hit the trade block. Now, I think we overpaid for Devontae at that point. But I think a guy like Jalen Ramsey is not going to go for that type of contract, right? And truth be told, I think, where the Raiders are right now, you could potentially land this guy, and he'd be a really, really good player for the Raiders. He'd be productive. We'll see what ends up happening. We got a couple other things that I want to just quickly touch on. Maxx Crosby, shout out to Maxx, man. One of the Raiders' best players right now. One of the all-time great edge players, right? Or at least he will be that when he retires based off the production and the trend that he's kind of on. Maxx Crosby was officially named the assistant general manager for football at Eastern Michigan University. Crosby becomes the first active NFL player to hold the position. He will help with high school and portal prospects, NIL budget, as special assistant to the athletic director. So Maxx Crosby is essentially getting a general manager position with his former school at Eastern Michigan. He also tweeted something to the tune that he wants to turn Eastern Michigan into an elite pass rush school, right? And he even put it out there that anyone that goes to Eastern Michigan, anyone that commits will have straight up access to him as an edge player. And I'll be the first to tell you guys, man, especially with how the NIL has kind of changed the landscape of college. If Maxx Crosby wants to make Eastern Michigan one of those schools, he definitely can, right? Between actually, the budget, the NIL budget, and donating and potentially raising money for Eastern Michigan as well. And there's multiple NFL players that have come from Eastern Michigan, right? Guys that have gotten paid in the NFL. You can definitely turn Eastern Michigan into a solid school that, has good pass rushers that kind of go through it. And Maxx Crosby is going to try to do that. Some people commented on some of these posts like, hey, is this going to take away from Maxx Crosby's, his vision of, hey, I want to win a Super Bowl for the Raiders. He started a podcast last year as well. Some people are like, hey, is he still invested in football? You can put in a ton of work getting better at football, spend 2 hours in the morning, 2 hours in the evening, and you still have 15 hours in a day left, right? And I think Maxx Crosby grinds, he works, and I don't think this is going to at any point impact what Maxx Crosby kind of does already. And I think for Eastern Michigan, this is a great hire, right? So shout out to Maxx for the new position. I think one day we'll see Maxx Crosby as a general manager in the NFL. So we'll see what happens. 2 more updates. Travis Hunter put out a pretty interesting statement. I think he was doing a podcast where he basically said he won't play football at all for an NFL team if they try to limit him to just one side of the ball. Hunter told Garrett Podell that no team has expressed any issues with him playing both corner and wide receiver. This is interesting, right? Because Travis Hunter is a guy that, he might actually be available in the Raiders pick. And I know some people will say there's just no way that type of player is going to be available. But some people have been speculating we might see 2 or 3 quarterbacks go in the top 5 to 6 picks, especially given some of what we've heard. The Saints have a quarterback issue that's kind of happened. Some people have even taken it beyond, and I won't get too much into it, but, Derek Carr has the injury that we've already kind of talked about. But some people are now saying that Derek Carr is actually quitting on the Saints, and he just doesn't want to be with the Saints anymore. And some people are saying that actually is what's happening there, which means the Saints could actually need a quarterback at this point. And if that's true, if that is 100% true, that means the Saints will look to trade up. Now, if the Raiders are interested in a quarterback, right, John Spytek's brought in multiple quarterbacks, right? He's spoken to all of the top-tier quarterbacks. If the Raiders are interested in a quarterback, that means the Saints have to jump us, right? Which means a team that does not need a quarterback will need to jump back, right? So essentially, a team that might be interested in Travis Hunter or Abdul Carter will need to trade back, essentially, right? I think what's going to end up happening is, Cam Ward's definitely going to go number 1, and then probably at number 2, we're going to end up getting, Abdul Carter, I think, would be the pick for the Browns. But I could also see them taking Travis Hunter to play wide receiver. But, I could also see the Browns going with Carter. He is playing the edge position. And imagine pairing up Carter and Myles Garrett. That'd be crazy. And then at number 3, some people are saying the Giants could actually take a quarterback. And let's say the Giants do take Sheduer Sanders at number 3. They've also met with Jalen Monroe. Some people are saying he's worthy of a first-round pick. Tyler Stowe of Louisville. Some people are saying he could potentially be a top 10 pick. Although I might not agree with those 2 scenarios, you never know what's going to end up happening. Right? We've seen quarterbacks go in the top 10 like Mitchell Trubisky. Right? So never say never. So essentially, we could see multiple quarterbacks go, which means a guy like Travis Hunter could actually be available for the Raiders. Now, imagine the Raiders actually bringing in Jalen Ramsey. Imagine Jordan Bennett taking that next step, and then imagine us drafting Travis Hunter. And Hunter plays, he plays full-time on the defensive side, but then he comes in and he plays 12 snaps a game on the offensive side, right? It'd be true third down passing situations that he'd come onto the field. But just think about the boxes that could potentially check, right? Now, I'll be honest again with you guys. If I'm drafting Travis Hunter, I'm drafting him to be a full-time wide receiver. A cornerback to me is a position where you can find a great corner in the 3rd, 4th, or 5th round, right? You can find a really, really productive corner in the 2nd or 3rd round, right? Depending on the defensive coordinator that you have, you can get a cornerback that ends up having success. I think one of the things with the cornerback position that we're seeing more and more is teams just aren't willing to take those guys in the top 10 unless you're a difference maker, right? Like Derek Stingley, for example, Jalen Ramsey, for example. To me, if Travis Hunter's a corner, he's good, but I think at wide receiver, he's a difference maker. And for him to say he won't play for a team that tries limiting him to one side of the ball, I do hope that allows him to slide, or I do hope it forces him to slide for him saying that to pick 6, and hopefully the Raiders can jump in on it. We'll see what ends up happening. And then lastly, as I said, the Saints and Derek Carr situation, right, it's getting worse and worse. The Panthers general manager did say that his phone didn't go nuts after the news broke on Derek Carr's shoulder injury, despite holding the number 8 pick right before the Saints, but he sounds like a guy open to offers. The Panthers general manager said, we'll be waiting if somebody wants to come up. So do keep in mind now, right? If the Panthers general manager is telling us that his phone did not go crazy, right? People did not start blowing him up. People did not say, hey, we need to jump in front of the Saints. If that's happening with the Panthers where no one's really calling them, that means that there are some teams that would be willing to actually do it, right? For the Panthers general manager to put that out there, the Panthers know that there are teams that want a quarterback. And we do have to keep in mind, right? For a team to say, hey, we're going to jump in front of the Saints, to date, that wouldn't make sense, right? Because then the Saints will just jump in front of that team, right? They trade with the Raiders or one of these other teams. So that wouldn't make sense for a team to jump up today. But the fact that the Panthers general manager is putting it out there that we're willing to trade that pick means there's teams that do want quarterbacks in this class that are picking a little bit later. And again, I think this is a great class where there's a ton of quarterbacks available. And I think it's a great class for developmental quarterbacks. So, if you're the Dolphins, if you're the Steelers, you might have a quarterback you've committed to this season. If you're the Jets, you have a quarterback you've committed to. But you could also look to potentially trade up and get one of these other guys that you can develop, right? So we'll see what ends up happening. But I do think for the Raiders, the best thing you can do right now is stay at pick 6 and hope that someone jumps in front of you, right? Hopes that, we're not going to take an actual quarterback this class, but let's hope someone gets in front of us so that you can have Travis Hunter or Abdul Carter, or one of these superstar players essentially fall to you, right? We'll see what ends up happening. Let me know what you guys think, man. Do you guys think the Raiders have a real shot at Travis Hunter? Would you want Jalen Ramsey if he's there? Imagine pairing up Jalen Ramsey with Will Johnson. If Will Johnson's truly elite, right? I don't know. I don't watch corners. I don't pretend to. And I don't really know which guys are going to end up being elite from college to the NFL. That's not my thing. But let me know what you guys think, man. Thumbs up, subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time with another video.